Hello, everyone. I hope you are enjoying the con so far. I am here today with Mike Shea, aka Sly Flourish, who has been, I'm assuming, extremely busy over the last couple of months with his new work as he's returned to form after 5 years. Interestingly, I did get into your first work, Lazy Dungeon Master, after I'd only been DMing for about 6 months. And then suddenly you're back with a new title, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. So first of all, congrats on the Kickstarter
Oh, thank
being
you.
an amazing success, and I know as well the PDFs are available. I haven't bought one yet, but that is because I really want a hard copy in my hands to read, especially while DMing on the table. But yeah, so let's talk a bit about Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. So you said in particular that it's 5 more years of experience, and in a way, that's what kind of coined you to write this. But was there anything specific, like a specific catalyst that said, "Damn, I've got to write this new one. I've got to write a second edition, if you will, of my book."
Yeah, there was. So there's a chapter in the book, and it's part of so the book is the first third of the book is sort of wrapped around the idea of 8 steps that you can take to prepare for a game in roughly half an hour. That's arguable. Some people are like, it took me 5 hours to do what you said you do in a half hour. But I think, I know I can do it in half an hour, and I think other people can get there in a half an hour. The 8 steps are not inclusive. You don't have to do every one of them if you don't need them. They're strictly which ones you would do. Like, and the Lazy Dungeon Master, the original book, didn't have 8 steps. It had like 3. So this one's got a wider range of things that you can do, but you can still cut it down to 3 if 3 are the ones that work best for you. One of those steps is defining secrets and clues. And this one is something that doesn't exist in the original Lazy Dungeon Master, and had become such a cornerstone of my own game prep, and had so many uses, so much value for the amount of time that we take with them, that I really I wrote a whole article about it on Sly Flourish called "The Lost Chapter of the Lazy Dungeon Master," and then I said okay, that was one of the things I felt was really missing from the book. The original book stands on its own. People still read it and buy it and like it, and but the one thing that I really thought was missing is that chapter on secrets and clues.
Yeah, I was going to ask you actually about that lost chapter with the whole secrets thing, because there's quite a lot of things I've learned as a GM over. There are certain parts that I specifically take longer to prep or shorter, whereas people can be different. But one thing that tends to bog me down a lot is things like secrets, puzzles, and all that, all the sort of little details of, say, a dungeon or what have you. So say that you had to prep something like a puzzle quite quick. What would be your techniques for doing that?
Yeah, so as you say, like puzzles can be really hard, and honestly, I don't prep them. Like they're too hard for me. So they take a lot of time to do right. There's some puzzle templates that I'll use. There's like the Mastermind puzzle. You can kind of Google that, but it's there's the game Mastermind, and you can sort of use that for a different kind of puzzle. If when we talk about a real specific puzzle. There's I think there's a thing called a Strimco puzzle, which is another type of puzzle where you can sort of put glyphs in there and people have to match up the glyphs. There's the standby of the decoding a cipher. Real basic cipher decoding is another puzzle that one can do. So there's some nice big templates that we can use when we want to put a puzzle in place, but I'm much more likely to steal those from somewhere else than I am to actually try to develop one. I think they're hard to do. The other thing is they're not really a core. This is arguable. We'll see if we start a fight, but they're not really a core component of D&D. They're not one of the major activities that take place. When you think about the 3 pillars of exploration, roleplay, and combat, they kind of fit into exploration, but exploration can really have a lot of other things going on there as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm one of these people who much prefers to use the environment almost like a puzzle, if anything, rather than sort of shove players
Specific
into
puzzle.
Okay, you must solve this puzzle in order to continue, because it can also slow pacing as well if you're not too careful.
Right.
But it's good if you get templates and things like that. And I guess it's the same with if certain clues are left behind as well, like maybe clues of old. But I suppose, you've got to kind of think outside the box a bit, don't you? Rather than sort of, it's always going to be an inscription or, the usual stuff. So in terms of things like that, and world building and sort of leaving stuff behind, is that something you like to incorporate as well in your dungeons?
Yeah, so that's one of the things, when we think about the difficulty of making a secret or clue, when think about a puzzle as a larger thing, like a mystery, right? How do we solve and uncover a mystery? One of the key components, so to define a secret and clue, and kind of just tearing the idea right out of the book. When one is doing game prep, one can spend probably the majority of that 30 minutes is really on that piece of secrets and clues. I think the rest of it can happen rather quickly. And a secret and clue is essentially like a single sentence of something that the characters might discover in the next session. So it could be a bit of history. It could be something very direct. It could be something about one of the NPCs that they didn't know. It could be any kind of thing that the characters might uncover that matters to the story or matters to the characters or is interesting to define the world, can be a secret and a clue. In one of my games, it was like one of the characters had secretly been transformed into a plant inside. It still looked like a Kenku on the outside, but all of his organs had been completely changed into plant stuff after making a deal with Zugtamoy, the demon prince of plant stuff. And I didn't know how that had been in my secret and clues list for weeks. And I had no idea how he was going to find out. Well, then he got hit with a finger of death in the chest, and it burst his chest open. And he looked down and went, "Oh my God, I'm made out of plant stuff. Like, there's no organs in here." And, that is a secret and clue that, can get uncovered. Besides being like a single sentence description of something, the other component of a secret and clue is that you don't know how they're going to find out. So it's different than saying like, we're going to have a secret and they're going to discover it when they pick up this rock and it's written on the underside of a rock. You don't know if they're going to pick up a rock and see if it's under the underside. Instead, we just know what they are, and then we improvise where they show up as the game goes on. And for like a mystery, if you have a murder mystery, you might start with the murder and then say, what are the 10 secrets and clues about this murder? Right, beyond like who did it and what they did it with and what the motivations were. Like, those are 3, but then what else? Well, so-and-so knows something about it, or so-and-so saw it, or you have all these like 10 things that sort of define the mystery. How the characters discover each of these secrets is undefined. And that way, when you're running the game, you don't really have this area where all of the clues were to the right and they all went left. And now they're, for session after session after session, they're not figuring it out. That problem doesn't occur when you're able to just drop those clues in wherever you want.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that both the books, so the original as well, you really emphasize this whole thing of discovery, the player's discovering aspects rather than, okay, there's a little box here or a location here and the players move from there to here, and very linear, very railroady. Which is fantastic. And for things like murder mysteries as well, that's quite fundamental, really, in order for it to play out. But of course, with D&D as well, and everything else, it's also important. But one thing actually that I particularly have experimented with, because I seem to struggle with that a little bit, is rather than in something like a dungeon or a city, for example, where it's almost kind of confined and you've got little things to work with. Things like journeys that are quite long, quite arduous, but can be very open-ended. What kind of tips do you have for those? Because obviously you've got like, you can roll an encounter, which is sort of the usual way of doing things. But to spice things up, what do you like to do for those?
So one disclaimer is I tend to run published adventures more than I run my own thing. But in the times when I have run my own thing, I usually keep the outline as loose as possible. So I'm thinking back to like a 13th Age game I ran, and I had this overarching campaign that we were going to run, and I really just sort of outlined the major components to it. Just like 3 words that would define an entire adventure later on. And I wouldn't, I would always keep sort of the resolution is pretty good for the next adventure, and then that resolution gets lower and lower and lower the further out we get. And the advantage of that is you're not spending a whole lot of time developing a whole lot of stuff that the characters end up avoiding.
Sure.
Right? You might just have like one line that sort of describes something. I also tend to define a larger campaign with an idea that I stole from Dungeon World, which is the idea they call them fronts. And you think about a front like a weather front. And a front is sort of it can be, most of the time it's probably an entity, it'd be like it's Tiamat, or it's the Red Wizards of Thay, or, it's the, the Zhentarim, the bad Zhentarim, not the soft Zhentarim we have these days. And you worry about like who are these major entities that are affecting the world, and what are they trying to accomplish, and what are the steps that they're going to take to accomplish it. And then those are sort of the big variables that are occurring while the campaign is going on. And the characters can become aware of the efforts that these groups are taking by watching those steps take place. And it all fits like on a single sheet of paper. You basically have 3 fronts, and then for each front you have like, here's their goal. And in Dungeon World, they call them grim portents. What are the signs, that things are going badly? How will the characters see that these things are moving forward? And that doesn't really, that doesn't really fill out an entire campaign, but it can fill out an awful lot of it, right? Like if you think about like, well, what's the point of the campaign? And I'll pick a published adventure, with like Rise of Tiamat. Well, it's on the title, right? We know that the goal of Rise of Tiamat is Tiamat's rising. So what are the steps that we're going to see? That where Tiamat is rising. What are the things that are occurring? Well, all the rich people are filtering their money to this, huge cult that's trying to use it to draw Tiamat out of the 9 hells. You see the money disappear. You see the temple of Tiamat rise from, the desert sands of the Well of Dragons, things like that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, mostly. I know that you do run a lot of modules, and I know I've seen some of your streams as well, with the Tomb of Annihilation as well. So I know that you work a lot on that. Now, modules is something I've touched on. I personally prefer my own homebrew stuff and like to create my own worlds. But my experience of running sort of published modules has been interesting, as I'm sure yours has been as well. So let's say, okay, you've got your module, you sort of do your own prep for it. But players are players. They're gonna deviate. For me, modules are quite restricting in that regard. But for you, what do you do? Or have you got an example of something where a player has gone really, really off piste, and you've had to get them back on track?
Yeah. So I'm usually the one that ends up taking it off track. Like, fair enough. Maybe I'm getting ahead of them, right? Or maybe we're working together. The advantage is, I think, like the last 3 hardback adventures that I ran are all pretty sandboxy on their own. So if you think about Curse of Strahd and Storm King's Thunder and Tomb of Annihilation, all of these, 2 of them are focused sandbox adventures. Tomb of Annihilation and Curse of Strahd have a clear sort of boundary around it. For Tomb of Annihilation, it's the peninsula of Omu. Or not Omu, of Chult. And then for Curse of Strahd, it's Ravenloft. It's the whole Barovia. And so when they have a focused one, they can kind of go wherever they want to go in those. And, I was sort of lamenting with a friend on Twitter just earlier about the fact that you end up only playing about 30% of those adventures because the characters take one path and there's 70% are in other paths that they might never see. And even if I run it for multiple groups, like when I was running Tomb of Annihilation, they all went west, which means they missed all of the eastern stuff. And it's like, oh, that's too bad. Like, there's a lot of neat stuff on the east. And in one case, I sort of like took one of the locations and shoved it west so that they would run into it. Cause I'm like, I really like this area and I want them to see it. So there is a bit of, you can cheat. And it's like, if you have a really cool place, it's like wherever direction they head, they're ending up at that place, right? Like, happens to be that they look at east, west, north, and south, and in every direction is a big castle, right? So that's, not quite, but you can always kind of move things around to get them to go to a certain place. But I'm pretty comfortable letting the characters go whatever direction they want to go. And sometimes it's even, it can, like, the players are starting to feel lost in their own directions. So Storm King's Thunder is also a sandbox adventure, but it's not as refined as Curse of Strahd or Tomb of Annihilation. It's the entire Sword Coast in the north. It's huge. It's 5,000 miles. I got a map here on my wall. I can look and actually see. It's like 5,000 miles north and south, right? It's a huge amount. And eventually they get ways to sort of get around quickly. But early on, it's like, well, if you want to go to this other place, it's going to be, 6 weeks of, 10 days of travel. So in that case, the characters did sort of go and grab on a hook and run with it and head off in another run. And they're like, we're playing a game about killing giants, and we haven't seen a giant in 6 weeks. And I remember, like, I kind of overheard a conversation between two of my friends that played in the game, and they're both like, what are we doing? Like, we're off, and we're like involved in all this political intrigue in Daggerford, and there's all this stuff between the leader who's actually secretly evil and this other leader who's, and like, I don't know how did we get here? Like, I thought we were trying to do, and I'm like, well, you guys chose it, right? Like, I'll go. And they kept thinking I was going to put it back on the rails, and I never did. I'm like, you could spend the whole rest of the campaign dealing with the politics of Daggerford and not worrying about the giants up in the north. And, but so I'm comfortable sort of letting them go in that direction. And I think by keeping the outline open, by worrying about what that next adventure is going to look like and not really prepping the one after that too much, maybe thinking about, like, well, what are the seeds that what are the hooks in my next adventure that might lead off to new adventures, is about as far as we need to go, really. And then, it can head off in whatever direction it wants to go. And then sometimes we have to sort of shove it back and remind them that they're supposed to be hunting giants, especially if that's what they want to do, right? If their goal is like, I really hope to kill giants. Okay, some giants attack,
Yeah, give them a huge hint.
Right, yeah. Giants attack holding a note that shows you the map to the other giant lair. That's part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning for a minute. You've obviously had a lot of experience GMing, and from what you're talking about, you've thought about this hugely, on a huge amount of depth, the whole concept of prepping. Now, I know that you're writing your book, Lazy DM, during the 4th edition. And I know that Sly Flourish comes from one of the thief techniques, which is good because my favorite class is also a rogue. And I know that you've written stuff prior to that, but how did Sly Flourish come to be?
So I think it's almost 10 years ago, when the 4th edition of D&D was just starting out. And I've run lots of different blogs on lots of different topics, and I always sort of like it. And I heard a podcast between two other bloggers on totally unrelated topics. One was Merlin Mann, and the other was Jonathan Gruber. Jonathan Gruber's a guy who talks about Apple stuff all the time, and Merlin Mann talked about productivity and stuff. And today, I don't know what he's talking about. I don't really listen to him. But they were on a panel, and they were saying, like, the whole thing was, how do you be a successful blogger? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And the thing was, like, what is the niche that no one else in the world is writing about? What is, and how do you refine it and refine it and refine it? And his example was, like, you don't want to be the guy writing about Star Wars, because there's lots of people that write about Star Wars. You probably don't even want to be the guy that talks about Tatooine or Jawas. You want to be the guy that talks about that one Jawa, that one, in that one scene where that one Jawa does that one thing. Be the absolute go-to guy for that Jawa. So anytime anybody has a question about that Jawa, they know to come to you. And I said, okay, so, there's role-playing games, and that's a big topic, and people have been writing about that for 40 years. As long as there's been an internet, there's been people talking about RPGs in the internet. But there's a new edition of D&D. So I could write about D&D, but I could write about 4th edition D&D, or I could write about 4th edition D&D for DMs exclusively. Like, how do we, and that's sort of where the tagline came up of, like, building the better dungeon master, right? Like, how do we all sort of explore this topic of DMing as an art form and get better at it? And what are the things we can do to get better at it? Including myself. Like, what am I, how can I get better at it? What are the things that I can discover? And I was really used to writing a lot, and it wasn't a problem. I kind of said, like, okay, I think I can keep up an article a week. And then on Twitter, I said, like, it'd be kind of nice to make a Twitter account that isn't about what kind of hamburger I had yesterday, but is instead about that, is focused on the reader. Like, how do I make each tweet, back when it was 140 characters, how do I make each 140 character tweet useful to the reader, something that they will get and gain value from, especially on this topic of being a better DM. And that's where I said, like, what if I wrote one tweet a day that offered a small DM tip, just something that somebody could grab onto and might help a little bit. And, many of them will suck, and a few of them will be pretty good. And, can I keep that up? And I'm like, a year went by and I had 12 articles and I had, 365 tweets. And then I said, okay, weekly is really hard. Maybe I'll go to 5 a week, or daily is really hard. Maybe I'll go to 5 a week. And then for a while, I just said, I'll post 1 tweet a day on the weekdays, because that's, anybody who looks at Twitter traffic sees that they drop off on the weekends. But eventually I went back and said, no, I'll go ahead and do it 7 days a week. Like, it's, I can come up with stuff. And the trick for both of those is I cache a lot of it. So I think I've got about 20 days worth of tweets that are already written and already in a system that can post them daily at a certain time. And I schedule that out for about 20 days ahead. And that way, only 1 day a week do I sit down and say, what are the 7 tips I'm going to put in? And I put in my 7 tips, they go into the system, and then I forget about them. Which is often funny because conversations will erupt about a tweet, and I wrote it like a month ago. So I've got to be like, what one are they talking about? Like, I don't even remember, I'm like, oh, that's right. There's that one, and then there's also like bad coincidences that occur where, like, I can't think of an exact example, but like where a topic is exploding on Twitter and then my tweet comes out and it's like totally contrary to what everyone was talking about. And it looks contrary when the reality is it's just poor luck. Like, I had no idea that was the topic of the day. And I do the same thing with articles. I write usually a couple articles a week and then stick them aside. And then on Fridays, I kind of say like, okay, what article am I going to publish now? What one of this pile of articles I've got, which one do I want to clean up and edit and, kind of make nice and then post to be published on Monday. And more recently, I've used a Matt Colville, very popular YouTube D&D DM guy who really grabbed onto the how to be a better dungeon master racket and ran hard with it. He talked about a website called Idea Informer, where you can put up ideas and have people vote on them. So I've started taking all of the time. What I realize is because I'm writing 2 articles a week, but I publish 1 article a week, I have this huge backlog of articles. And I was like, okay, I deleted a whole bunch. I've got a huge folder called unpublishable crap. That's all of these articles I said no one cares about. Like, these are all things I wrote full articles on, 1,500 words each, and they're all sitting in a directory and no one's ever going to see them. And I took the ones I did like, which is about 30 of them, and I posted them to Idea Informer and said, which of these topics do you guys want to see? And now I have a quantifiable measure that tells me people really want to hear about, whatever. And that way on Fridays, I don't have to go dig through my articles and figure out which one I want to write on. I just go, what's hot? What are people interested in? And I don't always take the top one. Sometimes I'll jump in the top, but I know 4 people said this was good and 86 people said this one was good. I'm going to aim more towards the 86 people because it's clearly what people want to hear.
Yeah, sure.
So that's a very long answer to your question.
No, it's good because it shows your progress over this 5 years, which you talk about. And I guess the concept of what you do, whether it's writing books or whether it's sort of publishing articles, etc., it's a very fluid thing, which in a way is really what DMing is all about, and that you're always learning, you're always sort of changing little things, putting new things into practice. And I see that with all kinds of GMs, changing their techniques, deciding to emphasize on one thing over another thing, and it changes. So it is very good in that regard, in that you've got this sort of entity of Sly Flourish in the books, but then you're churning out so many ideas and doing a lot of advice stuff as well, that you can pour it all into the book if you want, or you've just got kind of your own cloud, if you will.
Yeah. There's a lot of, and it gets bigger, and somehow I managed to squeeze more things in. I didn't even talk about the books. But a lot of times I'll get like another idea. And the hard part is like nothing tends to die. I don't, it's been rare for me to say like, oh, you know what? I'm going to stop doing tweets, or I'm going to cut my articles down to once every 2 weeks instead of once a week. I try to keep all that up, but then I'm like, maybe I could do like a Twitch show Sunday mornings. That's all game prep for my Sunday game, and somehow I managed to squeeze it in, like that one is good because there's no editing. Like I already have to prep my game. I shoot the show. I throw it on you. It takes 5 minutes to put it on YouTube and I'm done.
Yeah, but then it shows Lazy DM is working because you've got time to do it.
Right.
So when you, with these ideas that you come up with, and you come up with them very, very frequently, is it more from experience, from the games that you actually run and think, oh, actually that part I could have done it differently, or the player calls this? Or is it these sort of theoretical ideas that you then want to put into practice later?
It's usually an experience that occurred during a game. The DM tips are absolutely that way. So I on my weekly schedule, Thursday is the day where I put my new tweets into the big database to be published out on Twitter. And I do that on Thursday because my game is on Wednesday. So when I'm taking some kind of like mid-afternoon walk, and part of that walk is, what did I learn from yesterday's game? Like, what are specifically, what were the things that occurred during yesterday's game that were interesting? And like you say, they either worked really well. Here was an idea that really worked well. Here was something that failed. Here was something I wish I had done that I didn't do. Here's something that I think I might want to do later. That often feeds that. The articles sometimes get into like a deeper version of a tweet. I'm trying to remember, like today. Factions. So today I got an idea for an article that was about having multiple factions inside of enemy organizations. An example is like you have the Yuan-Ti in Tomb of Annihilation. And if somebody was saying like, well, the Yuan-Ti are kind of boring. They have all this like stuff going on, but really you're just going to go down there and kill a bunch of snake people. Right. And my thought was, well, that's not how it happened for me. And the reason why is that there's two different leaders of the Yuan-Ti and they don't like each other. And if the characters can get involved in that, every time you get involved with the enemy, with the faction inside of the enemy, you turn it into, a fistful of dollars, where the players go from, just killing everybody to working sides against each other. Right. And there's all this intrigue of like, which one of these groups do you want to betray? And you hate them both. So you don't really feel bad, about betraying one over the other most of the time. So I did it with the Red Wizards of Thay. I did it with the Yuan-Ti. I think that almost anytime you have sort of an enemy group, having a split in the factions can be interesting. So that came from a tweet. I started it off by saying, wow, that works. It's sort of baked into Tomb of Annihilation, but I sort of, I sort of hung on that, and that was good. And I put a tweet out saying, have multiple factions for your enemies. And there's like that, there's more to say than 280 characters on that. So I'll make a article about that. And that spawned an article. Other times the articles are sort of big, meaty topics on their own that aren't really going to fit into a tweet. And often they will come from what's going on in the D&D community about a particular topic. So I don't write articles that are newsworthy. Like I don't say like, Waterdeep Dragon Heist came out, I've got to write a whole series of articles about Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Most of the time because I think like I'd rather my articles have life years after they're written. And that means that it doesn't matter when I write an article about Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I want that article to be useful years later. And an example is I wrote a whole series of articles about Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat. And those are my most popular articles, and it's like, wow, that adventure's been out for 4 years, or almost 4 years. So it's good that they've held their own. And it's good that it's not like, let me do a review of Horde of the Dragon Queen. This is a good adventure, and here's how it fits into D&D these days. Well, these days change. And nothing to bash people who do write reviews, because I read those reviews. So I'm glad somebody's doing it. But it's just not what I'm going to do, right? What I'm going to do is not why this is a good adventure, but how can you get the most out of it? But yeah, it means that I don't have to be timely. I can sort of write what I'm going to write when I'm going to write it. And some stuff lives a long time and some stuff just, falls off as soon as it's read, it falls off, and then people don't go back again, and that's fine too.
Yeah, well, again, it's all fluid,
right?
With your sort of initial inspiration, because that is always really the first thing, even when you've had sort of preliminary thoughts about, okay, this session went that way and things like that. A lot of people talk about, oh yes, this image conjures inspiration for me, and you get a lot of groups now on social media as well, where people just post like an inspiring picture and then say, okay, what is this place, and things like that. And I know as well that you've done your art of fantastic adventures, art of this, which I'm assuming that implies that you are another culprit for images, presumably, and visuals as a big target for inspiration.
Yeah. So there's two. I'll give you two sort of answers to that thought. On the art books, I think a lot about, so I have two books, Fantastic Adventures and Fantastic Locations. And as you say, both of them have art books, The Art of Fantastic Locations and The Art of Fantastic Adventures. I wish they sold better. Not because I want to make more money, although that's always nice, but also because I think they're incredibly valuable. And I think they're valuable because it's the kind of thing a DM can't do easily. So when we have a book, the Art of Fantastic Locations has 30 pieces of artwork done by Brian Patterson of D20 Monkey. And I've designed these to be useful on their own. Like, you don't have to read their whole rest of the book. These are good visuals to show your players. They're good visuals to inspire you, but also good ones to show your players and be like, here's the creepy monastery on the hill. I don't have to tell you what it looks like. You can see it, or here's this crazy abyssal war machine that's eating the countryside, and it's that kind of artwork is not something that in your 15 to 30 minutes of game prep that you can put together. The same is true for nice maps. Like when you have really good maps, they're way better than the chicken scratches I'm going to do. So, it's one of those things where, like, if you're paying money for a published work, what are the things that published work can give you that you can't easily get on your own? So that was really the drive behind the art books, is that really of all of the things in a D&D adventure, I'm not like, I'm a writer, so I would love it that the writing was really the best part, but it's not, right? I think everybody can write, at least to the degree that they can read their own stuff, an adventure. It's the hard parts. It's thinking about the difficult parts. It's the thing that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of money, and getting that for $4, like, you want to get the maximum amount from that. So that's why the art books exist. Another inspiration that I have found, and I'm spending a lot of time thinking about it and talking about it, is randomness. And MT Black, who writes a bunch of best-selling D&D products on the DM's Guild, I talked to him about it, and he actually uses random tables uses a bunch of random generators to help him get ideas for titles for his works. So you see, like, his titles are really evocative and interesting. You're like, oh, that one sounds great, right? And the reason it sounds great is not because he's super brilliant. He is super brilliant, but it's not because he could just whip out these titles off of his head. It's because he uses a mixture of an external random source and his own intuition to generate really interesting titles. And I'm a big proponent, and talk about the things that where I feel like I'm getting my money's worth. When I look at, like, how Tomb of Annihilation has random encounters in it, and it's got like 12 pages that are devoted to sort of generating random encounters. And a lot of people are like, I hate random encounters. They don't have anything to do with the story. They're kind of filler. They just kill time. And I look at them and I'm like, no, this is a way for my story to be very different from anyone else's. And it's because this event occurs in this weird place and no one expected it, including me. And that, it makes it fun for me as a DM, but I think it also is, like, it's really interesting from a player's perspective, especially if they happen to run it multiple times, to be like, wow, we're deep in the south of Chult and we found a corpse of a member of the Flaming Fist, and inside his bag he had, a map to a place we didn't know about, right? Like, we should investigate this map, we should figure out what's going on here. And it's like, I had no idea that was going to happen. I just rolled the dice and that's how it worked out. So I do find a lot of inspiration from art, probably not as much as I could. But the thing recently where I've gotten a lot of energy and inspiration, and it's something that I'm thinking about, and how to kind of offer that in a way that doesn't completely, be structureless, is like, how do you offer random components to a product that helps a DM capture that creativity without, making it like, why did you sell me anything? I could have done all this. I could have rolled my own random charts. So, yeah.
That's fair enough. And yeah, I know that you love your handouts, and I've seen various maps and charts that you do, and I know that you still like to take a lot of time on those for the players. And I like a lot of props as well. And I think props are coming back in as something very quite intricate. You can make and craft things which your players then sort of gasp at in reaction. So out of all the things that you've handed players, what do you think is the most memorable thing you've ever handed a player?
So I have it sitting in my closet over there. I made it, it was right out of the Planescape Torment video game. The characters picked up a talking skull. This is a long time ago, 4th edition, back in 4th edition days. They picked up a talking skull, and throughout a long part of the campaign, they were finding gemstones to implant into the skull until eventually they had created a demi-lich. And I had the skull, right? It was it was like this weird bride's skull. It's got a veil, and I picked it up at like the Halloween store. So it's a physical skull. And they slowly started getting the gems, which were like crumpled up pieces of construction paper that they would fill the. Give me 1 sec. I'll go get it.
Oh, fantastic!
It's got spiders in her hair, fake spiders. So I kept it around because it's like, that's a great looking skull. All the teeth fell out, but she had all gemstone teeth. So that was a fun, and they knew what they were doing too, right? Like they knew they were building a demi-lich, and we don't know what's going to happen when we finish this thing. But, it sat on the table for a long time. So that was a fun one. Yeah, the Halloween store, raiding the Halloween store is always a fantastic thing to do. It's a great way to get these, really good props, kind of goofy props that like our players will laugh at. But it does add this other tactile, feel, look and feel to our games that we can't just get by talking. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of... With things like Theatre of the Mind, you've got your site and so on, and with the grid maps even you've got your site, but
right.
Touch is very important as well, and as you said, it gives that sort of that extra feeling. So I love that skull. I need to knit that idea somehow from you. So let's talk one shots for a minute, because there are fundamental differences in terms of planning campaigns and planning one shots. And I know that with Fantastic Adventures as well, you've got some really fantastic, memorable.
Hopefully. If not, I lied in the title.
No, they're really good. They're really good one-shots, people to try. What would you say was your favorite out of those?
I love the one called Gloom. Gloom, this is a spoiler. I will spoil this adventure, so if you're watching this and planning to play it, you probably want to stop listening. Gloom is an adventure about some rich kids who pee in the pool at a holy temple to an elven god. And then it turns out that one of the priestesses was a former elven assassin from 200 years ago who quit. And now she's really pissed off, and she's going to go assassinate those kids, and also the aristocracy that created these kids that spoiled them so bad that they would do such a thing. And the party has to kind of like, it's a mystery, right? It starts with like an attack against the king's forces by these hired thugs that she kind of hires, and they're paid with this blood diamond. That's this weird elven diamond that's been outlawed because it was used to pay off elven assassins, and they're all gone. And it's a fun adventure. It's actually kind of hard to run, and I've run it a few times now, and I think it's got a couple of flaws that clues can be dropped in that really steer the characters in the wrong direction. I was talking about secrets and how secrets always sort of lean back, right? And Gloom, in playtesting, I had to write some of it again. That was like, there's only one secret that matters, and that's where she is, right? Like the only thing you don't have to figure out anything else in the plot except go to the magnetic rock where there's a big crack in the wall and there's a shrine to the god of murder, and she's there. That's the clue that you need to get. But then sometimes I've played it and like players sort of grab an idea and run off with it, and you're like, I got to get it back over to that they know about the magnetic rock, but they're not going there. Like, they know she's there, but like, we want to figure out more. What's up with those cows? There's something going on with cows. I'm like, forget the cows. There's nothing going on with the cows. So I love that. That one is very memorable to me. I really enjoyed it. I love the idea of just, it's a fun adventure. I don't know that it's the best one because there are some key problems. Like, you want her to be somewhat sympathetic, but then she's also murdering children. So it's like real hard to do anything other than just want to murder her. But it's, yeah, I think that's my favorite one out of the 10 that are in that adventure. And I want to do a sequel. I want to have it where another adventure where like whoever it was that killed her, 4 more elven assassins come out of retirement to go avenge her. And it's like, oh man, 4 more of them.
If you're going to do a sequel, you've got to have the cows recurring in there.
Yeah, right. I got to have something. Now the cows, right now the cows are really in there.
Cows, that's fantastic.
I don't even remember how the cows got involved in the first place.
Oh, that's brilliant. But yeah, you've got time constraints as well with one shots, which means that you've got to kind of put a little bit of linearity in there to prevent players from
right,
going off and investigating cows and what have you.
Right.
Now I like to start my one shots a lot with a bang, something exciting to draw them in, and then sort of maybe let the pacing go down a little bit before ramping it back up. And going back to your list of 10 things in Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, is that something as well that can be applied to one shots, or is it more you kind of have like a streamlined version?
Yeah,
of it?
Both. It works for both. So the 8 steps in Return are is that what you were talking about?
Yeah.
They can be applied to one shots as well as adventures, and really like the theme of the book is like whether you're doing something really small and focused or something really large, the steps are largely the same. Like the real big stuff. I know a lot of DMs that will spend a lot of time. They have like those great big network, crazy conspiracy boards with all of the threads connecting all of these things together. And I think, experienced DMs know like none of it's going to go that way, right? Like throw that away, write an outline, have a guiding star about where you think it's going to go, and then worry about your next game. One of my earliest DM tips, I think I did like a little mini podcast back in the earliest days where I said like the whole thing was on just worry about your next game. Like the only game you have to worry about is your next game. You don't have to worry about 5 games from now. You don't have to worry about the big boss and what you're going to do. You don't have to, who knows? Who knows if you're going to get there? But you got a game tomorrow. Worry about that game and making that game as awesome as possible. And one shots are, perfect because they're refined around that. Like I got to make that game awesome. What are the things that have to occur in that game? And then how do I keep it flexible so that time can work out? A good example of this, and I don't know how well this transfers over to other one-shot games, but I run a yearly Castle Ravenloft game for Halloween. I'm running it in a few weeks here. And one of my tricks is like Strahd shows up 2.5 hours in no matter what. Like wherever you are in that enormous 180-room dungeon, he's going to come and get you. I think it's like I start a timer, right? And I'm showing it to the players like, this is how much time you have to pick up the 3 items and prepare yourself for Strahd because he's showing up at this time, right? And that way it's like, like I don't have to worry about how long it takes. And like it's so funny to sort of watch the characters panicking or the players panic as the timer's going down and like they're paying all this attention to like talking to NPCs early on, and then later on they're kicking at the door and here's this woman that they've been looking for and they're like, we don't care, where's the next room? We gotta get in there, gotta get to the Icon of Ravenloft. Where the hell is it? I don't know. Who are you? I don't want to tell you. Just cut the backstory. Tell her, let me tell you about how I came to this castle. We don't care. So that's fun to do. But again, I don't know. I guess anytime you have sort of an in-game timed event, you could just as easily transfer that over to a real-timed event, and that keeps your time on cue. The other one is like, and going back to Gloom, with Gloom, which is this sort of open-ended adventure where you can kind of explore lots of things. I said in there, like, you get to decide when you drop in this clue that she's at the magnetic rock. And you could literally do it in the first scene and do this whole thing in about an hour and a half, right? Like you could have a bunch of thugs attack the town guard, and then you interrogate the thugs, or you find the note and it shows the map to magnetic rock, and there you go, and there's the assassin you kill her. Yeah. Super fast, right? But then other ones you say, no, we want to make it harder. So you got to go interview the children and go figure out, what happened at the pool, and how find out about the kids peeing in the pool, and then find out about the fact that one of the priestesses was, had disappeared after that had happened, and then yada, yada, yada. But like you say, the other one is more linear adventures. We have a little bit better control over how much time goes in there. But I've certainly seen it with Adventurers League. It's really important for a DM to know when to be able to cut it short and where. Adventurers League adventures are pretty meaty. They're like 10,000 word adventures, and they're meant to be played in like 3.5 hours, but many of them are like 5.5 hours. So a DM really needs to say, like, which of these scenes is interesting? Like, I got to have the beginning and I got to have the end, and the middle is flexible. So what am I going to cut, to make sure that the end fits? And I think a big piece is like, always plan on ending with, keeping track of like, when did the last hour to 45 minutes of the game begin? And they better be kicking in the door to the boss's room at that point, right? Like, know that that's going to happen. And if that means shortening your whole dungeon and cutting 5 rooms out, do it, right? Like, that dungeon, everything is ethereal until the characters see it. So whatever map you have in your adventure is not the map that has to occur. You can just move the room and make everything faster.
Yeah.
So running one shots is its own particular form of art. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially as to the last sort of hour, 45 minutes, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking, especially if the players are kind of quite chill and you're looking at
right.
It's
right.
I've got this much time left. So yeah, that can be interesting. But yeah, so really just sort of last sort of subject I wanted to talk on today, Mike, was obviously with Sly Flourish, it's all been about 5th edition recently and fantasy. What's next for you? Are you thinking, because with your experience, maybe developing some more supplements, or are you going to go completely off, say, sci-fi?
No, I'm sticking to fantasy. Yeah, I mean, especially right now. Like, so, I love 5th edition. I'm a huge fan of it. I love everything else too. I backed every Numenera Kickstarter that's happened. I've got piles of their books. I've played it at conventions. I've run it a couple of times. I've got this whole Shadow of the Demon Lord thing from Robert Schwab. Fantastic RPG, getting very popular. I'm seeing a lot more people talking about it. It's just beautiful, and I've got tons of supplements for it. But when it comes down to it, I really love 5th edition, and people know 5th edition, and I'm still learning a lot about it. Like even just the past year or so, like learning intricacies of this system that I think are things I hadn't been paying attention to, that I'm learning by, watching people play it and talking to people who are playing it and hearing it from the designers. That, the books aren't changing, but somehow how I approach the game changes pretty radically. So it feels like, there's nearly a limitless direction to keep learning just in this one system. It helps that it's also incredibly popular, and that popularity has been growing. So I think people are somewhat resentful of this, that there are other systems out there that have a lot to offer, but we're all paying attention to 5th edition D&D. I'm not going to change that no matter what. So I might as well either ride that, continue riding that wave, especially because I like it. If I didn't like it, I wouldn't be able to. But I'm not going to go out of my way to switch systems. And sci-fi is cool, but it's not my bag, right? I'm like, not only am I kind of into fantasy and into D&D, but like over the past couple of years, I'm wired really deeply into the Forgotten Realms. So, I'm learning a lot about the Forgotten Realms I've been reading about the Forgotten Realms for, whatever it is, 30 years. But like now I've read the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide cover to cover. I've read all of this stuff. I know Waterdeep, right? So I've invested a lot of, intellectual capital into the Forgotten Realms. So that means I want to keep capitalizing on that. I want to know, I want to be able to keep moving with the Forgotten Realms and move with D&D. So whatever I do, now that said, I'm not publishing Forgotten Realms stuff. I could, DM's Guild is a great place to publish that stuff. But I like having my stuff hitting a lot of different markets, and that's something you can't really do when you publish on DM's Guild. So I'll still be writing my own stuff, but likely I want to make sure that everything that I'm writing could fit in there nicely. A little sneak preview is that I'm probably going to go back to the format of Fantastic Adventures and do something like that again. I think that's next on the list. But right now I'm at the tail end of getting Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master out in print. I'm hoping by next week it'll be available. So fingers crossed. I'm getting the proofs back, and if the proofs are good, I can pull the trigger on it. But if the proofs aren't good, then I got to go through a 2-week cycle. And I'm doing the Lazy DM's workbook, which was the Kickstarter stretch goal earlier this year, and that is in design. It's gone through all of the. It's in page layout. So it's gone through design, it's gone through editing, it's gone through, everything else. But we're still working on the page layout. Then the PDF will come out, and then we'll do print on demand for that. But that's probably a month or 2 away. So kind of focusing on that right now. I want that to be as good as it can. I'm doing a couple other small sort of freelance assignments in the meantime. But I'm starting to get my head around this idea of, what's the next evolution? What's the next thing that I want to do? And a lot of it is like, I look at like, well, what's missing? Like this is a big question I ask. My wife and I go on walks every day, and she's a big D&D nerd too. So luckily we both can talk about D&D stuff the whole time. And you asked about how Sly Flourish came to be. And a lot of it is like, what isn't being covered? Like, what is missing out there? And I'll tell you one thing you're not going to see. There's probably not going to be a Sly Flourish monster book, right? And it's because like between Mordenkainen's and Volo's Guide and the Monster Manual and Kobold Press's Creature Codex and Tome of Beasts, we have like literally thousands of monsters. And when you reskin them, you have an infinite number of monsters. So I don't, I sometimes get in trouble by saying things like, hey, everybody, I don't need any more monsters. And they like, screw you, I want to do monsters. And I'll go, you're right. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. And I'll probably buy more monster stuff. It's not something I'm going to aim for because I feel like I don't know if it's saturated. I don't feel like we need that. I don't know that helps DMs get to the table and play their games. Now you might argue that adventures are a similar problem, but I think that there's always room for more adventures. And I think people like having these small adventures that fit into a larger campaign. It was something that I aimed heavily for in Fantastic Adventures. Like I didn't want to give you a book and said, here's a big campaign for you. Here's your big level 1 to 10 campaign. It's set in my beautiful world with all my beautiful stuff that you don't know anything about and aren't invested in. I don't make a campaign for it because I'm like, you wrote one, right? Like you've got a campaign world in your head. And I want to give you things that you can grab onto and say, I see how this fits in my world. Or this would be a nice thing to run. I don't really have anything. Maybe I'll throw this in here. And that's why the town is relatively generic. The adventures are relatively generic. You can, some of them, we call it Fantastic Adventures, but many of the elements are not that fantastic. And it's because I want you to be able to rip this stuff out and put in your guys and your stuff and your places. So I would expect something else like that. And again, I'm obsessed with this idea of how to use randomness for creativity. So I would expect something like that as well.
And do you think maybe you'll branch out into maybe from a player's perspective something there, or are you very much the GM, the world builder?
Yeah. I don't think I'm going to do anything player driven. Because I never have. Right, 10 years I've focused on DMs, and there's so many people out there who are so experienced and have such passion for making player driven stuff. I don't feel like that's one where I'm particularly skilled. I don't think I care about it that much. It's a terrible thing to say. Like, I don't care about the players, but I care very deeply about my players. But there's a lot of options out there. The other and I think it's a lot harder to play test that stuff. And the impact, if it's bad, can be really devastating. Like if I make an adventure and the adventure has a bad part, maybe one piece of it, like worst case, I've ruined a night. And I really hope I don't do that. Like I'd be devastated if it's like, hey, we ran your adventure, everyone hated it. Like our whole group hated it. I'd be devastated to find out I wasted 4 hours per person of their time. But if I made like a bad character class that like ruined other character classes because they were dominating an area and it sort of broke a person's campaign and the player really liked it, but no one else did. And they couldn't get rid of it because the player liked it and they're tweaking it all. And it's just a source of frustration. I'd feel really bad about that. So I think that player stuff has a much bigger potential impact than some of the DM stuff. And a lot of people are doing it already. The other thing is like, I haven't done any analysis of this. Like I haven't done a survey or anything to really figure this out. But my hypothesis would be that people like and buy player option stuff, third-party player option stuff, but they don't use it all that much. Right. That it because I think DMs are apprehensive about allowing it. Particularly if it's not well play tested or they don't know where it came from. I know as a DM, like, I'm always apprehensive to let the Unearthed Arcana stuff in. And that was made by Wizards of the Coast. But I'm still like, yeah, but I kind of want to see it in a book so that I know that they play tested it before I allow that. I think some exceptions to that is like the player options that occur that Kobold Press puts out are really solid and they are play tested and they're nice. And I would use those more if we were playing in like a Midgard game, because now there's like a thematic reason to do that. But yeah, long-winded answer to no, I'm probably not going to do more player stuff. other than like magic items. Like I might do, I in the Lazy DM's workbook, I have what I think is a really nice magic item generator, so that you can get these really unique and flavorful and interesting and powerful magic items that don't break the game, but offer a lot of thematic interest. So tiny little things like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today, Mike. It's been amazing to get all your insight as well, and I'm sure that the viewers as well have really enjoyed listening. I hope as well that the rest of all the hard copies get produced very smoothly, and the rest of it goes okay for you. By the time this comes out, we will know, of course. But is there anything that you want to say to your fans who are going to be watching at Con+1?
No. Keep running great games. Like I'll give one a tiny little rant. Not really a rant, but like a thing, which is all of our experiences are valuable. So one of the things that I was really careful about with writing a book like this is that it isn't the way to play D&D, right? I have a whole chapter at the end of the book where I just talk about contrary evidence to the stuff I put in the book. Like, I talk about running a game in half an hour. Matt Mercer takes 2 hours per hour of gameplay to prep his game. He is not a lazy DM, and he is by far the most viewed dungeon master in the world. So there are lots of people with lots of different approaches and lots of individual DMs who have lots of different approaches. I probably think that we are by and large, DMs are strong enough to remember what works for them and not sort of like read a book like this and go like, oh, I'm throwing everything out that I've ever done and I'm going to follow everything in this book. The book is another piece of evidence about how to run games, and we're gathering those pieces of evidence from all over the place. So I think keeping a mixture of an open mind to new ideas, while at the same time remembering that we don't have to completely alter our system to take in something new, I think is very powerful. And I think it's very powerful for DMs. Take a new piece of evidence and let it slightly alter your course, and then take in more evidence and so on. So that's fine. Not the most pithy. Yeah, not the most pithy tagline, but keep learning. How about that? Hey, this is Mike Shea from slyflourish.com and twitter.com/slyflourish. Not everyone is as lucky as we are to be able to play games with our friends all of the time. So make sure to dig deep and donate to Child's Play so we can help kids get better, so they too can play some great games.